In the meantime, Bobby Sands went out, had a meeting with the number one governor in the H-Blocks, Stanley Hilditch. And at this meeting, this was just the straw that broke the camel's back, I suppose, in terms of our decision maker, was that Hilditch said to him, Sands, this is the crack. See until your men come out of those cells, put on that uniform, and obeyed by the directions of my prison officers and not your IRA colleagues. Only then will you be getting moving out of these cells. And that was it. So we then come back in, found ourselves in exactly the same position that we were in the previous year, prior to the hunger strike, and argued without saying that the second hunger strike would have to take place.
Come, Irishman, I pretend, and listen to these words I tell, for I sing ole from a bygone day, for the brave young lads we all knew well. Young lads who died that freedom's light might shine so bright across the land. For no braver men has Ireland seen.
Well, once we began to embark on the second hunger strike, there's a couple of things. First of all, Bobby Sands was going to lead it. And I distinctly remember almost an argument between him and me. That he came back from a visit, and in the midst of telling me, I'm not sure if it was Jim Gibb or Danny Morrison or Joe, whoever it was up, it was liaison with leadership people on the outside. And he had said to me, look, this is happening, that's happening, and going to do this, going to do that. Oh, and by the way, I've told them that you're going to be taking over as OC when I go on hunger strike. And I said, beg your pardon, you didn't tell me that. No, that's the way it's going to be. And I said to him, yeah, but you didn't ask me. You never even discussed this. You just, no, that's the way I want it. That's the way it has to be. You're going to be it. I says, no chance. And he said that, no, this is the way it has to be. And I've already told them, and there's no going back in it. And I said, well, first and foremost, I says, there's a pretty long list of people who are more senior than me in terms of the camp staff. You've an OC, you. I said, you've a vice OC. You've an adjutant, you've an education officer, you're intelligence. I says, you've the whole 9 yards. I says, I'm sitting on the pay grade pretty down. I write the letters. I make the statements when I get people to write letters. I says, I'm a PR person. And he says, no, it's not happening, you're it. And I said, well, look, Shinna Waltz is the vice OC. He's been in and out of the cages. He's been back in here. He knows this whole criminalisation process, the politics of it, upside down and inside out. And he's next in line. So, I mean, he ticks all the boxes. And Bobby said to me, yeah, but there's one particular issue he says you're forgetting about. I says, no, I've covered everything. He says, no, you need to understand, that's my best mate. And I says, what has that got to do with it? And he says, well, let's just suppose we get into a situation where there are negotiations that the Brits decide at a crucial stage where I am in a bad situation and can't really adequately conduct negotiations. He says, you're going to have to, or he would have to negotiate on our behalf. And he says, I'm telling you now, he'll not let me die. And I was sort of a bit taken aback by that, by saying, well, the inference to that is that I will let you die. Yeah, no, that's the crack. He says, that's the way it has to be, and you need to do it. Now, he's displaying a confidence in me over him and me knowing each other for a couple of years and being together and feeding off each other. And to me, I felt I wasn't capable of that level of leadership. I just didn't feel that I was the person. But he was convinced, and he just said, you have to do it. That's the way it has to be, and that's the way it's going to be. So in that sense there, I'm arguing with somebody who's going to embark on a hunger strike, who believes that he's not going to come out the other side of it. And I just felt that, well, if that's the confidence of somebody like that, the least I can do is try and measure up to his request or his requirements of what I need to do. So I accepted the position as OC.
As Ireland sing, that O'Hara Hughes for Carishan sound.
Well, it was decided that he was going to lead the second hunger strike, and the day chosen was March the 1st, which was a Sunday Sunday. And we had decided that it would be a staggered hunger strike, that he would commence, to be followed 2 weeks later, roughly, by Francis Hughes, and then followed again a week or so later by Patsy O'Hara and Raymond McCreesh. So it was taken, that strategy was taken on the basis of that there would be no collective mentality development coming towards a crisis period, that people would arrive at a crisis situation on their own. And therefore, I suppose people have asked us in the past that we were very harsh about this, we were very clinical about it, and that it was a severe sort of way of dealing with the hunger strike. And we said, yeah, I mean, that's the way it had to be, that the onus of responsibility to embark on hunger strike or to terminate hunger strike lay squarely with the individual, obviously based on all the information that they would be receiving at the time. And that if one individual decided to end the hunger strike, it would still be continuing with others. So what happened was he commenced hunger strike on the Sunday, March the 1st. We were out in the canteen, just in our prison trousers, to go to Mass. And myself, I think Jake Jackson was along with me, and we were talking to Bobby. And we had developed a replacement strategy, that if a hunger striker died, he would be replaced by another hunger striker. This would give a clear message to everybody that this was continuing, this was not going to finish just because a hunger striker died, that they would have to come to terms, the Brits would have to come to terms with the fact that this was an ongoing protest and would only finish when a resolution or negotiated settlement were arrived at. So on the Sunday morning, we were talking to Bobby out of Mass. The priest was in the corner here in confessions, and the two wings were in the canteen. So there was the guts of between 80 and 90 prisoners, a bit of pandemonium, and the mood was upbeat because the hunger strike was commencing that morning. So we talked to Bobby about his situation. He'd been out to the doctor to get weighed and measured and all the rest of it, so we're taking details. And during the course of the conversation, he happened to say to me, what about this replacement strategy? And I says, well, that's in place, everything's sorted. We had somewhere in the region of about 80 plus volunteers for hunger strike, and we had developed a strategy. We had a list of people, and I says, that's all in place, And then he said to me, well, who have you got to replace me? And I was a wee bit taken aback by that, because I didn't expect that as part of the conversation. And I says, well, look, you've just started your hunger strike today. You have a visit tomorrow with your family. I think you should be more focused on that. Instead of worrying about replacement strategy, everything's in place. And then he sort of looked at me very severely, and he says, listen, you better have your head around this here, he says, because in 2 months' time, I'm not going to be here. And the onus of responsibility is going to be on you. So in those terms, he says, you better have your head around everything about what this replacement strategy is and what way this hunger strike is going to run. And I was sort of dumbfounded, and I says, well, if you must know, I says, it's Joe McDonald. It would be your replacement in the event of you dying. And he just paused for a moment, and then he looked back and he said, Joe McDonald, that's a good choice. He says, that man will never let you down. And then in the next breath, he says, who did you say had the tobacco, smuggled tobacco for me? And I says, Philip has it down in the corner there. Right, he says, I'll talk to you in a minute. And away he went. And I think Jake and me were speechless. Just because, to me, this was the measure of someone focused, dedicated, knew precisely what was happening, and was obviously concerned about me and making sure that I had a clear view of what way things were going to develop the whole way throughout the hunger strike period.
Young Irishman in Ulster Bar.
The communications network during the hunger strikes had been one that had been successfully developed in the previous years. It just had been refined because of the hunger strikes. For example, notes were written on cigarette papers, wrapped up in small pieces of stretch and seal, and smuggled outside, or smuggled out on a visit, handed to a prisoner from another block to go into someone on another block, and back and forward. And it had become so efficient during the hunger strike period, where we had set up a link with the Sinn Féin office, the POW department in Belfast, and a number of visitors were chosen, primarily women and girls, who would come up on a visit with a prisoner from our block or whatever block and exchange messages. So there would be comms coming in and comms going out, back and forward. There were other items coming in, like we smuggled in tobacco and cameras and all sorts of things, and radios, etc. So all this sort of would have been smuggled in. So what happened was, for example, on a Monday morning, we could have smuggled a note out on a visit with the prisoner with one of the women from the centre in the Falls Road. They would bring that straight back when the bus went back at lunchtime. Somebody would read that and they could have a response in on a visit on the afternoon, because we had a structure where we asked everybody to sacrifice one visit per month in terms of communication during the hunger strike period. The same thing applied to messages to other blocks. If you were going out on a visit, you had a note with you for the OC H5. You met somebody down the blocks, where you're from, H5, here, note for you, bring that over. And that was the communications network. And the prison hospital was a wee bit more difficult once you went into the prison hospital. What you had to rely on was a message to you outside and then being brought in again when a visitor went into the prison hospital. But it was efficient, and that's how the communications network worked throughout the whole protest.
Deprived of freedom, work and hope, oppressed by ruthless racist laws that grind men down beneath the yoke.
Well, what had happened in terms of communication, so that we would have access to news, readily available news, we smuggled in to every block, and every wing, as far as I remember, had the availability of a smuggled radio, a small crystal set, very, very small, which could be wrapped up with tissue and stretch and seal and smuggled inside your body. When you took it out and set it up at night, you would scrape a wee bit on the wire mesh around the inside of the window and attach a long copper wire to that. And you had an earpiece that came out of the inside of this and a small dial to turn. You were able to get BBC Radio Ulster, BBC Radio 1, 2, 4. You could get those stations. And late at night, when the screws were off duty, we would attach this up and you would have news. You were able to then put it all away again and secrete it. So each block certainly had a couple of these, and they were crucial throughout, because you were getting news as everybody else was getting news. Now, it was BBC News and BBC commentary. You can still read between the lines, but at least you were on the air with news on the moment. When the second hunger strike started, we terminated the no wash protest and asked for furniture to be put into the cells with a guarantee that we would not destroy it. And once that came in, they began to leave in a newspaper. So you would get the Irish News, the Irish Times, or newspapers like that began to be filtered in. So you'd be able to read articles and read commentary. But the crucial thing was these small radios that were smuggled in the small crystal sets, and it kept us aware. So once you'd finished the 11 o'clock news at night, for example, you would just call everybody in the wing and say, Nuacht an ish, and then you would give it out in Gaelic, so that there'd have been a screw down in between the grills at the bottom on duty, although everything was locked down, that you would give as much news out as possible, and during the course of that period. The other thing about news was people who had visits coming back in were able to relay news items coming from outside directly from Sinn Féin sources.
And how then on the blocks were you informed of the passing of the hunger striker?
Well, when a hunger striker reached the crisis period, the bulletins going out on the small radios were on the air, and you would know when the crisis period had arrived, and then it would tell you on the news. For example, when Bobby Sands died, we knew 3 or 4 days in advance that, you know, the news was reporting he is lapsing in and out of a coma. His family are by his bedside, so all the signs were there, and his breathing was laboured and then slowly but surely. And then what I did with the radio I had, instead of parceling it up those nights at 11 or 12 o'clock, I kept it, and then I would parcel it up and put it away before 7 o'clock the next morning when the doors were unlocked for breakfast. They come around to give you breakfast in case there was a search. So I actually heard the news of his death on the 2 a.m. news on BBC News, and they just said that at 17 minutes past 1, Bobby Sands, MP, IRA hunger striker, has passed away, or has died. So that's when I became aware of it. And then what you do then is you just wrap the heating pipes down at the wall beside you, and you filter the news from cell to cell and let everybody know. So you would be aware immediately. I mean, there was a classic one when Bobby Sands got elected, and I had told everybody when the result of this election comes in, and if we get the positive result, just deal with it quietly, because the result was coming in the afternoon or lunchtime or late in the afternoon when the screws were on guard. And I remember the wing that Tom Dutch was in, and there were nearly all young ones was on that wing, and they were specifically told, see, when you get the news, filter it through the block. And when the news came in that Bobby Sands had got elected, we could hear on the other side of the block the banging of the doors and the yells and the shouts from the other wing. The boys all celebrating that he'd got elected. And the screws come around, they opened doors, which meant the guy who had the radio, had a tough job getting it secreted. And the joke about it was the screws were coming around, and they opened the door and said to Tom Dutch, no, Sands hasn't won the election, it's not through yet. And they were only after getting the result 5 minutes before it. So in that sense, we were concerned they would do a raid and find the radios, because you had them out during the day, which was taking a risk. But in that sense, they were crucial items of keeping us in touch with what was happening.
And when the bloodhound comes at night to terror strike across the land.
Well, you see, morale during the course of the blanket protest had been up and down, when things weren't going anywhere and people weren't, there was brutality and there was beatings and you could cut the atmosphere in blocks with a knife, it was just heavy duty. And what happened was, coming up to the start of the hunger strike, morale lifted. And during the hunger strike, when you think there's a potential, because there were interventions during the course of it, Bobby Sands, there were a lot of visitations. The Pope sent an envoy, different Irish politicians, English politicians. There was an intervention which involved the European Commission on Human Rights, I think it was. A delegation had come in when Bobby and the other 3 lads were on hunger strike. And, there's potential for movement, and I was able to get up and visit them. So issues like that there during the course of it gave the potential for an avenue for the Brits to get out of it. But particularly in that one there, we had set down a marker, the hunger strikers agreed, and we set down a marker that in the event of any negotiations or discussions in relation to an end to the hunger strikes, that we required 2 nominated advisors from outside, Gerry Adams and Danny Morrison. And when I had got up to the hospital, I met with the commissioners and told them that where's Gerry Adams and Danny Morrison, they need to be here if there's going to be any discussions. And I said that they says no, Bobby Sands has already indicated that he won't allow a visit with us unless they're here. I said, well, that's the way it stands. There's nothing I can do about that. I said, so all you got to do is phone them. And then they told me that the British had already told them that on their way over that Gerry Adams and Danny Morrison were persona non grata and were prohibited from entry to the prison, and under no circumstances would they be getting in. So at that stage, I was aware that was going to be it. And I went in to visit him. And one of the regrets I have that I didn't ask at the time, I wasn't thinking about it, could I visit each of the others as well? But specifically it was to do with him, because that was the request. And they phoned the Brits said, yeah, no problem. And I went in to visit him, and there was a medic at the door. It was very hushed, quiet. He was propped up on pillows in his bed, and when I walked in, he couldn't actually see clearly who it was walking into the cell. And they are small, even though it's a hospital wing, they're still small rooms. It was only when I got to the end of his bed that he recognised it was me. He found it hard to speak. His eyes were sunken in his head, his cheeks were sunken, there were dark rims around his eyes. His breathing was laboured, it was difficult for him to talk. and to hear me properly as well. His hearing was impaired a little bit. So I just moved very close up beside him and had a chat with him, explained to him that I had talked to these commissioners, and that his first question was, "Where's the big lad?" referring to Jerry Adams. And I says, "Well, they contacted the Brits," they said, and the Brits have told them that under no circumstances is the big lad and Morrison allowed in at all. And then he realised, and both of us knew at that stage that that was it. They weren't going to use that opportunity as an avenue to get out of the situation, even with a high-powered delegation from the European Commission. So we had a brief chat about a variety of things. He was asking about the women comrades in Armagh, asked him about the lads down the wing, and etc., and how I was, and just generally how things were going with the contact we outside. And I don't think I was there 15 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes tops, just a conversation. And the last thing that he said to me when I got ready to go, he just says, "I'm dying, Cara, I'm dying." And that's the last I spoke to him. And I just move away back to the block after that.
But short is the hour of those in power who truth and the rights of man betray. But the fight will go on and will not be done while man is unfree in this fair land. And in freedom's days we will sing in praise of Ohio.